Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the end of what was quite an eventful week. But let's not go there right now. Let's enjoy this little escape from social media for the next 45 minutes, shall we? For those of you that don't know me, I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficiency Canada. So welcome back to another Friday Discovery session. For those that are new, we ask that you save your questions to the end. We have about 20 minutes allotted, so we usually get through the majority of the questions. And a reminder that we have a pretty hard stop at 12:45 Eastern time, so that you will have plenty of time to get back to the rest of your day, or just starting your day if you're on the West Coast. So please join me in welcoming our guests today, Jesse Rowe, former VP of Corporate Performance at Energy Efficiency Alberta, and Barend Dronkers from Energy Future Labs Fellow, who will be sharing the results of an EV-related study. I'm really looking forward to this. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks for having us, Natalie. So I'm going to kick us off once again. Jesse Rowe. I was with Energy Efficiency Alberta. For those who don't know, Energy Efficiency Alberta closed its doors at the end of September. But Barend and I wanted to still give a presentation based on some of the work that we had done prior to that. So we had contacted Efficiency Canada. I guess this was probably back in the spring when the study was first published, and we wound up scheduling a spot for the beginning of November here. So yeah, neither Barend or I are with Energy Efficiency Alberta anymore, but we thought it was worthwhile to present some of the results of the information, the study, which is posted publicly. So I want to make sure that we're continuing to leverage the value that's been generated off of this. So as far as a little bit more background, the work that Energy Efficiency Alberta was doing is now being led by a number of organizations in the province. So the Municipal Climate Change Action Centre is one of those, and Barend has moved over to that organization to support some of that work. And then Emissions Reduction Alberta is another one as well. And I don't know if people noticed or not, but there was an announcement, I think it was the beginning of this week, a new program that they're going to be delivering in the province for small and medium-sized businesses to help them with their energy efficiency. But for us, we want to focus on the study that was completed around EVs, non-wires alternatives, demand-side management. I notice our title slide has more acronyms than probably it should at this point, but that's hopefully what we'll unpack over the next 20 minutes. So to start off, I'm going to go through the context of the study. Why did we undertake this study? And then Barend, who was hands-on and working with a consultant on leading this work, is going to go through the nuts and bolts and the results that came out of it. So why did we undertake this study? To be honest with you, we didn't start out intending to undertake a study like this. We were actually involved in something called the distribution system inquiry that the Alberta Utilities Commission had launched. And that inquiry was really looking at what are the new technologies that are emerging, distributed generation being, I think, the driver for them, seeing what's happening in the US and other jurisdictions when it comes to the uptake of solar. Certainly in Alberta, we've got a lot of distributed generation coming from natural gas combined heat and power as well. So that's obviously has impacts on the grid and the distribution system. But they also included in the scope a broader suite of technologies. So electric vehicles certainly popped up as something that's going to be expected to impact distribution grids going forward. No surprise there. Energy storage. And we were there providing input around energy efficiency, demand side management side of things, and distributed, demand response was the other technology area that was also part of that conversation. And so part of the input that was provided actually came from the distribution utilities, and one of the distribution utilities, EPCOR, who runs the distribution system in Edmonton, brought up the impact of electric vehicles. And I'm actually going to jump forward a slide here and show you some of the information they brought to the table. And they were basically saying when they look at the potential impacts of electric vehicles, it doesn't take too many Teslas in one distribution neighborhood level transformer in order to start exceeding some of the the maximum operating parameters that they've got on it. And so you'll see once you start exceeding that, earlier burnouts and maybe even upgrades required. And so they were talking about for the Edmonton system, potentially having as much as $20 million in upgrades required for this level of EV penetration. And so from our perspective, when we were looking, I'm going to go back a slide now, when we were looking at our role within the distribution inquiry, we were certainly highlighting how demand-side management, energy efficiency can help to manage some of the costs and impacts of new technologies on the system. And this looked like a really good opportunity to demonstrate that specifically. And so we worked with Navigant and now Guidehouse to put together a study looking at how demand-side management can help mitigate some of those impacts. So I'm going to step past the EPCOR slide now. And as far as the rest of the context goes that I'm going to provide, I'm just going to provide a few examples from other jurisdictions where they've looked at this as well. And then Barend's going to jump into the study that we had undertaken. So in terms of the EV impacts, here's two studies, one that was European-based, another that was US-based. And they're both basically pointing to the same thing as EPCOR, is that introduction of electric vehicles straight onto the grid, no smart charging or anything like that. People just come home and they plug in whenever they want. Certainly is going to have an impact on the distribution grid. And here they were talking about several hundred euros per EV or several thousand US dollars per EV. There's a range of expected impacts, but there's a couple of studies that kind of reinforce what EPCOR was saying. And then as far as studies go that we're looking at how to mitigate that impact, the first bullet here points to two studies that were done in the United States where they were just looking at demand side management, so energy efficiency and demand response. And they were two separate regions within the US, the Southeast and New England. And they were basically saying that demand side management could help to mitigate those impacts of electric vehicles. And then the chart to the right is the last bullet point here, where the same study that was referenced in the previous slide was also looking at smart charging as a way to mitigate those impacts. And so certainly there's opportunities there as well. And then we've got one study done by the Rocky Mountain Institute that was looking globally and putting the two things together, smart charging and demand side management, energy efficiency specifically, in order to manage some of the impacts. And so in this study, what you can see is that the gray is without electric vehicles. The dark green is the peak that you see with electric vehicle uptake that is not managed at all, no smart charging or anything like that. And so certainly that impact is there in terms of increasing demand during peak times. And then they looked at, well, how can smart charging help to manage that? And so certainly there's a big decrease that can happen through that, but it doesn't completely reduce the impacts on peak demand. And so they looked at energy efficiency as another way to manage that. And so you can see that through those two mechanisms, they were able to bring it back down to what demand would be without electric vehicles during the peak times, notably, obviously shifting that demand to off-peak times. And one of the reasons we talk about peak times is because that's what you need to build your infrastructure for, is for those peak loads. So certainly those are the most expensive hours of the day in terms of how do you meet those demands. So that's it for me in terms of context. I'm going to pass it off to Barend now. He's going to take us through the study that we had commissioned.
Thanks, Jesse. Maybe I'll ask you to just continue with the slides and I'll cue you up. So yeah, as Jesse mentioned, I was the technical review for this project that Navigant, well, formerly Navigant, now Guidehouse, completed with Energy Efficiency Alberta at the time. We're going to be using an illustrative model that captured data from one of EPCOR's transformers. It's a residential transformer. They gave us data for several, and we chose a representative that is kind of your typical, as well as would sort of be what you would expect to see in a typical situation for the period of the study. This happens to be a 35 kilowatt transformer. Maybe you can move to the next slide. To complete the study, we also had to get an understanding of, well, where electric vehicles at and what's the uptake that we expect in Alberta. It's a fairly similar trajectory that the AESO, so that's the Alberta Electric System Operator, they did a forecast as well. However, 10 years earlier, we think the the time lag in the ASO forecast might be somewhat pessimistic. Therefore, but what is essentially good to know here is that the uptake trajectory is similar. So what we did, we have two scenarios. There's the base scenario and there's the aggressive scenario, and we applied that to the expected number of EVs to be plugged into this transformer. It's a transformer with, I believe it was 10 houses plugged in. Correct me if I'm wrong, it may also have been 12. And then the moderate scenario, when we apply this provincial level trajectory to that transformer, we're talking about 2 electric vehicles being plugged into that transformer, and the aggressive being 3. And it's that one additional electric vehicle. We're talking, you know, if you look at a Tesla, it's about 7 kilowatts peak demand that a Tesla would draw. So that's a substantial amount on top of a 35 kilowatt residential transformer. Next slide. Here you can see what that substantial amount of additional electric vehicle load looks like. So this is your typical day sort of profile. You've got the hours along the horizontal from you know, midnight back all the way to midnight. You can see kind of around that peak hour when everyone gets home and plugs their vehicle in. A usual load in dark blue, which is kind of the present day situation. You've got a lot of breathing room before you hit the transformer max. Plugging in 3 EVs on that transformer, you kind of pop up 10 kilowatts of additional demand. And that's what we're trying to solve here in a way that doesn't involve traditional wires investments. And so we're proposing, and we conducted this study, or I shouldn't say we, Energy Efficiency Alberta commissioned the study to understand, well, what can energy efficiency, demand response, and smart charging do to alleviate that and meet that demand need at a much lower cost. In fact, a net benefit. Next slide. So this is the result. Well, it's the costs associated with building a portfolio of energy efficiency, demand response, and managed charging. That's smart charging in the moderate scenario. So we've got 2 electric vehicles plugged in. It's showing the costs associated with those technologies meeting the need. So every hour that we modeled for a year had a need associated with it. And only during the time when there's more demand than the residential transformer can handle, we have a need. And then it's looking at the portfolio of technologies available during those hours to fulfill that need. This is where we've kind of stacked it all together. So the representative cost is sort of an average of every single hour of need and the cumulative capacity available to fulfill those needs. We can easily fulfill the moderate scenario needs of 2 electric vehicles with just demand response and energy efficiency only. Next slide. And when we account for not just the cost of those technologies, but also the carbon and energy savings associated with those technologies, you can see that energy efficiency, which in the previous slide was in the middle, has now been pushed out to the left, meaning that it's actually a net savings. It's not a net cost. And demand response is still that same spot. And you can see managed charging. So smart vehicle charging isn't even necessary in this case to meet the needs of the transformer. Next slide. Here you can see the net savings that I was talking about. So your traditional wires cost investment. So that means installing a new transformer that is large enough to meet the demand needs for that particular feeder line. And then you can save 96% of that cost by investing in a DSM program, so a portfolio of energy efficiency and demand response in this case instead. That cost is, in our model, calculated around $442 versus a transformer that costs $10,000 or more. Then you add in the energy savings. You therefore go below the $0 mark. And furthermore, when you add in carbon savings, we've got even further net savings. So if you take the difference between traditional wires and then this DSM program, adding in all the different savings, we're actually coming out positive of $12,000 or more in this scenario. Next slide. So aggressive scenario is slightly different. We're adding one more vehicle. So remember, that's about like Tesla's 7 kilowatt fast charge. And you can see that at this point, we do need smart vehicle charging. When we previously only had 2.7 kilowatts, now we have 9.7. So not much to add here other than emphasizing that it's really just that one extra vehicle that bumps us over the line. However, this is based on that more aggressive scenario over the timeline of 10 years of that uptake that we illustrated previously in the slides. Next slide. Here you can see the net benefits. So again, energy efficiency has significant savings associated with it. Demand response, which is in the middle, and then the net requirement for smart vehicle charging. Next slide. And here are the savings. In this case, the cost of the DSM program, as previous in the moderate scenario, was only $400. It's substantially higher here because of that big chunk of smart charging necessary, which drives down the savings. So previously, almost 97% savings. Here we've got 60%. The energy savings doesn't quite bump us to a net below that $0 mark. But if you add in the carbon savings, we get down to the negative mark. And negative just means that instead of actually costing money, this investment in these non-wires solutions actually saves money. And when we're talking about saving or spending, the analysis that we conducted here is societal level. So we're looking at the savings experienced by the homeowners that invested in these technologies. The costs and the savings had to be matched. So when we're looking at the costs here of the DSM program, we're talking about the costs associated with implementing it during the hours of need of the transformer. And then likewise, the savings is the savings during the hours of need of the transformer, just to clarify. Next slide. Here is a bit of a summary. In essence, we can see net benefits between 7,600 and 18,000 over traditional wires investments. So that's the savings as a baseline of doing the traditional wires investment. And we're talking savings of relative to that investment. Next. In summary, demand side management is able to mitigate the needs of that transformer, and that's in both the moderate and aggressive case. Smart charging is necessary in the more aggressive scenario, and depending on the assumptions made and the aggressive or moderate, we're ranging from 2.5 to 24 times more cost effective than upgrading the transformer itself. If you include energy efficiency and demand response, they're both more cost effective. And in fact, energy efficiency is a net savings. compared to smart charging. And energy efficiency provides that net benefit. So if you include the savings of energy, and then furthermore, if you include the savings of carbon. That's all. I'm definitely happy to answer many of the questions that you may have. I'm seeing a couple trickle in the panel.
Perfect. So I'll get started. So just a reminder for the participants on today's call, there are two ways to ask questions. The first one is to raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask your questions yourself. The second way is to type in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I can essentially narrate your questions for you. So we're going to get started here. Actually, a question from Ralph Torrey here is, in the larger context of the low carbon transitions, the buildings will presumably transition from gas to electric heat pumps, as opposed to the current Alberta electricity baseline, which has very little heat in it. This brings not only electricity DSM, but also thermal retrofit into the picture. What does that scenario look like?
So oh, go ahead, Jesse, if you wanted to.
Maybe I'll start and then you can add on if that works.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I saw that one come in, and I know, Ralph, you've done some work on this previously in terms of deep building retrofits. So I think my perspective is, you increase the electricity demand for heating on top of electric vehicles, or maybe the other way around, and you just take what we've studied here and you put it on steroids. It's going to be a bigger demand, and then the need for retrofits, demand side management, energy efficiency, demand response is going to be increasing in value and need. But of course, the heating for buildings is a bit of a different type of load than electric vehicles. Whereas I think the smart thermostats and smart heating and cooling is going to be important, because of course with electric vehicles, if you don't have any smart charging, people might come home, plug them in and start charging right away when the peak is the highest, whereas demand for heating and cooling is going to be different throughout the course of the day. But that also means that we're going to need to be very, very mindful of when those heating and cooling loads come on, and there's more flexibility potentially with those heating and cooling loads. And then to add on to that, with increasing amounts of renewable energy on the grids, the importance of when you heat and when you cool is going to become even more important as we go forward. Sure, I'm not telling Ralph anything that doesn't know already, but that was my kind of perspective on his question. But love to hear what Barend has to say about it as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to also clarify, because we had questions like that from previous presentations. The model used sort of the representative energy efficiency retrofit opportunities that were assessed in the Energy Efficiency Alberta potential study, which assumed sort of the baseline installed technologies in Alberta, so predominantly gas heating. And then you might ask, well, where is that energy efficiency and demand response potential coming from? If the furnace is a gas furnace, well, there's all kinds of other things going on in your home, from the fans that are pushing the heat around, lighting, refrigeration, so a lot of appliance type stuff. So that's kind of the demand that we pulled from. If you convert all the homes to, if you electrify the heat, then as Jesse said, you're adding to the demand. So in a way, you're adding to the problem. But an electric heat pump, just like your electric water heater, can be scheduled. So they're part of that demand response package. And you can, of course, install very energy efficient heat pumps. You can also install inefficient ones. So those are still part of your general energy efficiency portfolio. And you can see that, maybe not in Alberta at the moment where I'm based, but you can see it in large parts of the states where you still have energy efficiency programming, where you're incenting or replacing old heat pumps with new heat pumps.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I know there are parts of Canada that offer that, so that's a good example. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm just gonna, just in case there's anything you want to add. sorry, the question jumped around here. Here we go from Stephanie Ripley, and a few people have liked it, so that means it's high on the list. So what are the recommendations to ensure the needed energy efficiency and DSM measures are implemented, as presumably these would need to be at the load or residence and are under the purview of the individual property owners?
Jesse, do you want to start that one off, or?
Sure. Yeah. So this is that's a good question. Certainly, as Energy Efficiency Alberta, we were advocating that there be programs to be able to engage with homeowners, and not just homeowners. This is an issue that could affect the commercial buildings as well, and commercial regions of cities. And so to engage them in programs that have been proven to reduce energy use, encourage the installation of energy efficiency technologies, demand response, smart charging technologies. I think that's all going to be needed in order to kind of manage these peaks going forward. So I know these programs, I guess, traditionally exist in lots of provinces across the country. I think what we're talking about here is taking those existing programs that are proven to work and ramping them up, doing even more with them.
Yeah, I think so. What this study was trying to illustrate was the case for energy efficiency programming. So providing the incentive, or even having the utility offer these programs, simply because it's cost-wise, it's better. They're better off spending money on energy efficiency and demand response than spending it on upgrading a grid asset. That does require some changes in the regulation to enable, spending on demand side programming versus just purely spending on hard wires and poles. That's why it's called traditional wires. We're talking about the transformers. So it's opening up that utility space and allowing demand side programming to be an integrated part of the system.
And just to be clear, that's kind of an Alberta specific comment where
yeah,
for utilities, whereas other provinces, it varies across the provinces in terms of who's able to currently do that as a utility.
Thanks, Jesse.
Exactly, that's okay. Question here from Laurie is, what is a municipality's role in ensuring all of this happens? So example, like the smart charging, etc. What is the electric line provider's role as well?
Yeah, and I think Barend started answering this one already, where it really depends on where you're located. In this instance, I'm assuming that the wires provider is perhaps owned by the municipality or specific to a municipality. We've got a mix of those in Alberta. Some cases there's a direct connection with the municipality. In other cases, the municipality isn't as involved in the distribution system. But certainly in a place, actually probably either of those cases, the municipality can certainly be engaging with that utility to talk about what is their planned approach to this increase in demand on the electricity side of things. And it may not be an increase in demand that's expected in the next year or two. In some cases, we may be talking about 5 or 10 years down the road. But as Barend already pointed out, the ability for a utility to be able to engage with consumers about smart charging and energy efficiency demand response, to be able to invest some money into demand side management, that may not even be possible right now. And we all know that the regulatory system is not incredibly fast in how they change their rules and how they operate. And so right now would actually be a really good time to start looking at it, investigating it, and seeing what would need to happen so that down the road, once the expected increase in electric vehicles comes, once, to Ralph's point, increase in electric use for heating and cooling or heating side of things increases, then the utility is ready and has a plan and isn't stuck in kind of how we developed the system many decades ago, which is their only response is to build wires, to upgrade the transformers, upgrade the wires, which we see through this study and other studies is the more expensive pathway. And so starting that process of thinking through, well, how do we perhaps approach this differently than we have in the past, I think is going to be really important. And especially with renewables coming on the grid as well, from a grid management perspective, that's going to be increasingly important as well.
So, echoing the emphasis on regulatory changes taking a long time to move along. Yeah, starting early, having the conversation. I think beyond having the conversation, working with the utility company and sort of pushing them along, sort of getting them to think and work outside of their comfort zone. And maybe step two would be to, I know that Quest Canada is working on sandboxes, and there's other folks out there interested in pilot projects. So just priming the pump, so to speak, such that when 10 years down the road, when this may actually be a problem, that we have the solutions in place to address them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be nicer, or addressing them before they become problems would be the ideal. A question here, a question here from Christy Dreyer is, could you clarify demand response? Means that you're asking or forcing Teslas to charge more slowly, or how is this different than smart charging?
I can take that one. Oh.
Did you want to go first, Barend, this time? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so demand response, Navigant Guidehouse, who conducted the study, they looked at some of the technologies that we had as part of the Energy Efficiency Alberta portfolio, as part of the potential study. So as modeled here, we're saying that a certain proportion of loads can be moved around. So it's not necessarily moving around when your Tesla is being charged. That would be called smart charging. Demand response case, it's more like, well, when does your water heater kick in? When does the fan kick in? Can we move loads around to sort of fill in the valleys and shave the peaks? So the Rocky Mountain Institute chart that Jesse showed at one point can illustrate fairly nicely how that works. But go ahead, Jesse.
No, I don't really have too much to add. The traditional definition of demand response is when the loads on the system get high, a signal is sent, and that piece of equipment will operate differently because of it's responding to the peak demand that's in place. And in some cases, it can be a signal, or in some cases, we can just program things to work off peak or shift their load to off peak. So sometimes it's done through a price signal. Sometimes a large industrial customer, we've got some of that happening in Alberta right now, they'll actually get paid to turn off during peak times, because it actually is a net benefit to the system. So there's lots of different ways in which it can be done. I always think of smart charging as actually a form of demand response, but we break it out special because it's going to have a big role when it comes to EVs.
Yeah, so this is kind of a question that Dan had here is, I think it's probably similar to what you just talked about, but I just want to clarify, is EV load forecasts consistently references Teslas. Did the forecast factor in Tesla owners' choice of scheduling charging to off-peak periods?
So what we wanted to do with the study was look at the EPCOR scenario, where they took an extreme scenario, which is, I think everybody agrees is extreme, is that you don't have any smart charging at all. And so that's likely not going to be the case. But I guess, from time to time, there might be that case where those two Tesla owners and that one transformer both are trying to, go somewhere that evening and decide to, do full charge right away. And so, again, it's an extreme scenario, but what we wanted to do was present that extreme scenario so we could see how do you manage it. And obviously smart charging, which is expected in a lot of cases, is a big part of that. But I think the point is that not everybody's going to be programming their smart charging in the same way if you don't engage them about how important it is. I mean, for me right now, there's no time of day use right now. There is no financial incentive for me to program my Tesla in a particular way, or any of my other, other electric vehicles you might have. And so what we found with energy efficiency programs historically, demand response programs, and I would expect with smart charging as well, is if you engage with the consumer, they're more likely to undertake the behavior that you're looking for. Whereas if you don't, some will and some won't. And so I guess the point here is that even if some will, some won't. So it is more cost effective for us to engage them on smart charging and energy efficiency and demand response than to not engage them at all and just build wires in response to whatever behavior they choose to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Jesse. I think the education and outreach is a often overlooked but very important piece of energy efficiency.
Don't forget incentives, because that can really motivate people to
yes.
take action as well.
So just a question here from our friend Ralph Torrey is what he's wondering is whether there's a path to electrified neighborhoods that does not require a rebuild of the local distribution system. And after adding the heat pump load and the EV charging, can we save and manage our way out of the need to upgrade distribution? What are your thoughts on that?
Are you talking about new builds?
I haven't looked at that one specifically, Barend. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, no, I hadn't. Can we clarify with Ralph? He's talking about new build neighborhoods that are fully electric, or are we talking about retrofitting old neighborhoods?
I think Ralph's going to join us.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I guess I'm talking about existing neighborhoods, since with a new neighborhood, presumably the distribution systems that are being built in will be anticipating a much more electric future. But in our older neighborhoods, one of the things that we're running up against in suggestions to start doing multiple electrification projects, deep retrofits with conversions to heat pumps, is that it would trigger a need to upgrade the local, to upgrade the local transformers and so on, as well.
I'm wondering if there's an opportunity there. Some jurisdictions are already piloting the whole vehicle to grid thing. So if we're talking about full electrification and the timeline associated with that, you could think about, well, what can the vehicle offer to the grid as well to reduce loads as an idea. I don't think with a full electrification scenario that we can get away with no upgrades to the grid. We're going to need to, regardless, invest in, and there's different solutions that are being provided as to, like, in terms of advanced metering infrastructure. Do we need to go the full Monty, complete AMI pathway, or are there solutions that that more rely on the Internet of Things and sort of the Googles and other tech companies offering solutions to help manage grid demand and yeah.
Yeah, another big factor in most parts of Canada, it's not a factor in Alberta and Saskatchewan so much, is that there is quite a significant amount of electric resistance heating already on the system. And that presents an opportunity, again, if you upgrade to heat pump technology for it, a significant portion of that load, it takes tremendous pressure off. It creates a lot of headroom in the local distribution capacity to handle houses that are not currently heated with electric heat pumps, but are fossil heated. It creates room for them to come on, along with the electric cars.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess it really also depends on where you're electrifying. If you're electrifying electric resistance to heat pumps, it's not really electrification, but you're definitely creating headroom.
Awesome. I'm just going to, they have a few questions particularly about the study. So I'm going to ask them here to see if you can answer them quickly. On slides, actually, Jesse, you might have to turn to these slides. We'll see. On slides 14 and 17. So those two there. The question is, can you explain where the carbon savings come from? So are they coming from the reduced infrastructure requirements, grid optimization by using more renewables, or a combination of both and or other?
So literally, when we're investing in these DSM programs, we're spending money, or in this case, it's more efficient appliances, furnace fans, lighting. You do that to reduce demand during the hours of need, but you're also reducing electrons that have to be generated. So it's the negawatts, it's pure energy efficiency. You're no longer needing the electrons that were needed for that 80-watt incandescent light bulb, and now you're only using, you know, a handful of watts. And during those hours of need, that electron didn't need to be generated. Depending on your portfolio, so in Alberta, it's fairly, coal still plays a role in natural gas. So it would be the emissions associated with generating, and then also through line losses, you've got additional, I guess, electrons that are saved. And it would be the carbon savings associated with those.
Yeah, and I think in the scenarios that we modeled, it was kind of a future grid mix, so not a lot of coal that's being phased out. But I think there's another question that was raised, but it would be the reduced emissions from the natural gas power plants, because there still is expected to be 10 years from now quite a bit of natural gas generation on Alberta's grid.
Yeah.
That's perfect. It's great. I'm able to check off some of the questions here. Another question from Christy here is, how many households are there for each transformer?
I
So
think
Barend wasn't sure whether it was 10 or 12. I think it's 12 that we had in the study.
Okay, perfect. And then just one last question. What are the EV penetration scenarios as a percentage of all vehicles?
so if there's 12 households, in the moderate scenario, we're talking about 1/6 penetration.
That assumes there's one car per house, and that's not the case on my street.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, one car. Sorry, Jesse.
So I think the penetration is the percent of vehicles that are electric, right? And so I think your 2 out of 12 houses having an electric car is the percentage of houses that have electric cars. Whereas if the houses have more than one electric car or more than one car, so on my street, I probably at least 1 to 2 per house. So I think you're probably looking at maybe 10%. But I think the and 10%, I mean, right now seems like an awful lot, especially here in Alberta. But you know, in different places, that 10% is going to be reached at different times. And remember, we're talking about at a neighborhood level. So in some neighborhoods, or you know, a feeder level, which is 12 houses. So for some groups of 12 houses, that 10% is going to be reached much quicker than another set of 10 houses somewhere, 12 houses somewhere else. So I guess the ballpark we're in, but yeah, I don't know if we actually estimated what the percent of overall vehicles in the province or in the city. So we'd have to do a little bit more math to figure that out for you.
Yeah.
I just want to see, Barend, if you have something you want to add before we.
No, I was just trying to do the mental
Your
math.
head, yeah.
I know that by 2030, in the aggressive scenario, we're talking about 400,000 EVs. And I don't know what the projection is for a number of cars or vehicles, for that matter, in that same time window. So
yeah, I think that's the number we're missing right now to answer that question, is the number of cars in Alberta expected. So.
We'll stick it with a lot. I think that's probably the answer. So thank you so much for this great presentation. Glad that you guys were able to come back and show the results of this Energy Efficiency Alberta report. It's really useful information and really great information to kind of get out there and have if anyone has further questions, feel free to get in touch with me and I'll put you in touch with the team here. So again, thank you, Barend, and thank you, Jesse, for joining us today. A heads up, I'm really excited to share that the 2020 Provincial Energy Efficiency Scorecard that Efficiency Canada does will be released on November 17th, so coming up soon. So keep an eye on our social media for the details. You'll see who the winners are are and who the most improved is this year. I don't know if you're going to guess who it is and which province it is. So I am also excited to share that we're going to be hosting our policy team on November 20th for a discovery session to discuss the results. And then you can ask questions at our Q&A period. So that will be a really interesting discovery session on November 20th. But until then, next week, I will be joined by our friends at Electricity Human Resources Canada, who will share the findings from their latest research, Generation Impact, which collected the opinions and attitudes of over 1,500 Canadians aged 18 to 36 towards careers in electricity and energy. So tune in to say what the kids are saying these days. Thanks again for joining us this week, and I look forward to seeing you next Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.